Hi, welcome to Scholar Chats. Today we are going to hear from Dr. David Tandberg, the author of The Conditioning Role of State Higher Education Governance Structures. Dr. Tandberg joined the State Higher Education Executive Officers Association, also known as SHIO, in July of 2016. He serves as Vice President for Policy Research and Strategic Initiatives. In his role, Dr. Tandberg leads SHIO's policy and evaluation and research initiatives, SHIO's efforts to connect empirical research to state practice and policy. He also helps lead SHIO's strategic direction and partnerships. He is the lead editor of a book dedicated to the investigation of state higher education executive officers that was published in July 2018 by the Teachers College Press. Previously, Dr. Tandberg served as an associate professor of higher education and an associate director of the Center for Post-Secondary Success at Florida State University. As an academic researcher, his research was published in numerous peer-reviewed outlets. Before joining Florida State University, Dr. Tandberg served as a special assistant to the Secretary of Education in the Pennsylvania Department of Education, focused on post-secondary policy development and implementation. Dr. Tandberg earned his BA in History and Government and Secondary Education, Social Studies from Adams State College, and a Master's in Political Science and a PhD in Higher Education from Penn State University. So let's hear from Dr. Tandberg. Hi, Dr. Tandberg. Welcome to Scholar Chats. Thanks so much for meeting with us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
How did the topic for the article that the class read, how did it come about? And can you talk to us about the process of how the article was published?
Yeah, so it was, as a graduate student at Penn State, I became increasingly interested in state policy for higher education, and particularly interested in state governance and the role of state higher education agencies, or what we sometimes call governance structures. And I ended up actually doing an internship at SHIO while I was a grad student, and had quite a few internal conversations with people like Paul Lingenfelter and others about different structures and how they may impact how policy and finance decisions are made. Mm-hmm. And then in my dissertation, I had a variable. One of the variables I had in my regressions was an indicator for the existence of a consolidated governing board for higher education. And so that's a really powerful state higher education agency. And it was significant in predicting, impacting state funding for higher education. And so that naturally led to questions of why. And I started to think more and more about it. And I thought, well, when you have such a powerful state agency, the decision-making has to be different. And I began to conceptualize it and read some literature that supported the idea that these governance structures may serve as a buffer between the institutions and lawmakers, and may change the way the political factors function within the state. And so I thought about, well, how could I explore that quantitatively, and came up with the idea of using interaction terms, and collected the data, ran the analysis, and wrote up the paper. It was most of the work happened while I was a faculty member at Florida State University, and it was one of the funner projects I engaged in there. I enjoyed it quite a bit.
Thank you. And so this research study, it was a quantitative research study.
Yes.
Use that method over any other method?
Yeah, it was purely quantitative. I would say it was informed quite a bit from my experience. I worked at a state higher education agency, and then conversations I had with folks at SHIO and people in state higher education agencies and other researchers. But when it came down to it, it was a quantitative study that involved data collection, measurement questions, and then statistical analyses.
Thank you. The article mentioned the greater centralization of the governing boards, the more power and influence they have over higher education. Can you tell us why this is this way?
Yeah, so it is a challenge. That's a very good question, and it can be hard to place state higher education agencies into buckets because they look different in all 50 states. But one way to think about it is, governing boards versus planning or coordinating boards. And governing boards have a lot of authority, statutory and constitutional authority over the institutions. And so they can have internal budget authority in regards to the amount of money institutions get, but also how they spend it. They also often hire and fire the presidents. They engage in contracting for the institutions, et cetera. And so you can think that they have their reach into the institutions is quite deep and broad, whereas coordinating boards deal mostly with state policy considerations. Governing boards do also, but that's coordinating boards generally have little to no influence in deciding who gets to be a president or whether they're fired. They may play a role in the appropriations process to institutions, but not in the way the institutions spend their money. Things like that. Governing boards almost always set tuition. Only a few coordinating boards do. And so they operate quite differently. And institutions that operate under a governing board, the governing board can tell them what to do. Coordinating boards can't really do that in the same way. And so the existence of the governing board in a state really changes the way things function within the state.
Okay. Can you give us some examples of an ideal boundary spanning organization and how they might manage governor and interest group participation to magnify positive effects? I know you mentioned lobbying to legislature is an article as one of them. Do you have any other recommendations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And, when I think about these state higher education agencies, whether they're a governing board or a coordinating board, no matter which type they are, they have some shared responsibilities in my mind anyways. And one of them is this boundary spanning role, where they ought to protect the institutions from too much political meddling. Lawmakers can kind of come up with some pretty wild ideas that in fact are fairly inappropriate and don't properly respect academic freedom or academic deference and the amount of autonomy colleges and universities need. And they also, the education agency has to be an advocate for higher education institutions and the institutions to lawmakers, right? And so, then behalf of the institutions to the lawmakers, and also they need to represent the interests of the state to the institution. And so higher education needs to be nudged. They also need to be moved at times in the direction of the interests of the state. And they left to themselves, they won't always advance the state's interest. And so the governing board or coordinating board, they need to in ways that improve the outcomes of the institutions on behalf of the state and the students.
Mhm.
And so that's, fundamentally, that's the boundary spanning role that they have to play. And as they keep those higher order goals in mind and appropriately balance those two responsibilities, I think they're functioning as a good boundary spanning organization.
Okay. You stated in the article that political factors on state efforts for higher education vary, and it relies on if the state adopts a consolidating governing board. Can you speak to the factors of why would or wouldn't they adopt such a board?
Well, it's hard to say why they would not adopt a governing board for higher education. Honestly, there was in the 80s and 90s, there was a real tendency amongst the states to reorganize their higher education governance structure. And so you would see states move from a governing board to a coordinating board and vice versa. Sometimes the reason was because they really didn't know what to do about higher ed. And so the easiest thing to do was to reorganize their governance structure. It's a way they could look like they were doing something on behalf of higher ed, but whether or not it resulted in improved outcomes, we really don't know. There isn't much evidence to support that it would. Following that time, we didn't see a lot of reorganizations. It seems to come in waves.
Mm-hmm.
Some of that recently. Oregon went from a governing board to a coordinating board.
Mm-hmm.
Tennessee has remained a coordinating board, but undergone some pretty significant changes. But I think at this point, most states are looking to policy changes, not governance changes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that we'll see another wave of governance reorganization for a little while. We may in 3 or 4 or 5 years, but I think the tendency now is to work within the structure they have. That said, politics can really change things. And if you get a powerful legislator who does not like the current governance structure, they can, if they really want to, they can change it. Or if the governor gets the idea that it needs to be reorganized, then it probably will be. We saw that in the early 2000s in Florida, where politics got mixed up in governance, and we saw some real changes to the governance structure there.
Mm-hmm. So why are state governing or coordinating boards, or lack thereof, right? I'm going to pick on California because I don't believe California has one, and I'm picking on California because I'm from there.
Right.
Why are they so different between the states?
It's just our federalist approach to everything. We we like to believe that every state likes to believe it's a unique snowflake. And so they all do it differently. You got different demographic, political, economic characteristics, and those factors result in different ways of government functioning. And our diversity of governing and coordinating boards is symptomatic of that. And that in every higher education system looks differently. And so that's really it. We have diverse states, and so therefore we have diverse approaches to higher ed governance.
Yeah, I read an article the other day about Betsy DeVos at the level. I know this is out of the subject, but in the Department of Higher Education, they have a tremendous amount of turnover over there, and a lot of staff members that aren't in there anymore. So they're reduced their staffing by numbers and numbers and numbers.
Yeah.
How this all affects the states also, right? Because they're all interrelated. So
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a very important observation.
Mm-hmm. So the students in the class watching this Scholar Chat are doctoral students, some of whom are working in policy and are aspiring to work in policy and use their doctorates to make some change. Can you share about your career trajectory and how you got into policy? I know you mentioned a little bit of that in the beginning, but can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, I was really inspired by some professors I had in my graduate program, and especially Don Heller. And that got me inspired enough that I ended up doing a master's in political science concurrent to my doctorate in higher ed. And then I did the SHIO internship for a summer. And when I was getting ready to graduate with my PhD, I was thinking I might go academic, and I had a couple offers. But then an opportunity to work in Pennsylvania SHIO agency, the State Higher Education Agency, opened up, and my advisor, Don, advised me to take it. And so I did, and it was a great choice. I learned so much, and it was just an exciting, stimulating, thrilling experience. You know, I worked incredibly hard, but in the mix. I was in the trenches making real change and fighting the good fight, as you might say. And it really changed my thinking on my research. I was a political appointee in the second term of the governor, so I knew I was only there for about 3.5 years. I was able to continue to advance my research, and so I was well positioned to go on the academic job market again. And I landed a tenure track faculty job at Florida State University. And I was a much better faculty member, teacher, researcher because of my experience of working in a SHIO agency. It just really changed my thinking or improved my thinking. The questions that I asked, the way I could interact with policymakers and lawmakers. It was great. You know, I taught public policy for higher ed, politics of higher ed, governance for higher ed. I had real experience, you know. It was cool to be able to share that in my teaching and interpret the research through the frame of not only a researcher, but also someone who had done the work. And then, you know, the opportunity to move to SHIO came up, and it's a wonderful place to work. It also happens to be located in my home state. And so it was an opportunity I couldn't turn down. And it's neat now because my experience of being a tenured, you know, associate professor of higher ed, plus someone who worked in a SHIO agency, both of those experiences inform my work here at SHIO every day. And it's great to be able to take the knowledge I have from those experiences and apply it to assisting state higher education agencies across the country on a daily basis. And so my advice is to have an open mind. There is no one career trajectory is better than another. You kind of have to decide what excites you the most and know that you're not locked into that job for the rest of your life. I've had 3 major career changes, and I've loved each one of them. And so, you know, have an open mind, throw yourself into whatever you do, but know that you don't have to stay there forever. You can move, you can make pretty significant moves if you want to, as long as you're working hard and doing good work and have an open mind.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And I would also think that there's some passion involved there too, right?
Yeah.
It's coming from a woman of color, right, who was who lived in the barrio in California, you know, and I wasn't supposed to make it to higher ed. So before I got into the policy class here at DU, I wasn't sure if I wanted to work at all in policy, but after reading the historical context of racism in Colorado and, you know, I'm going to use the word, I got pissed And like I really wanted to do some policy work because of that. And
Yeah,
I think
I
that's the
get it.
passion, right?
Yeah,
So, yeah.
for
Well,
sure.
thank you. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. Do you have anything else that you wanted to add regarding the article or any other advice for the students?
No, I really like what you said, and I was it kind of lines up very much with what my final thoughts were planned to be, which is, find something you're passionate about, whether it's a research question, a topic, a job, all of the above. All of this work is really hard work, and it can be taxing, it can be tiring, it can be frustrating. But if you have a passion for it, it can still motivate you through those times and to dive in, to work hard, and to push through the hard times. Which, when you're trying to fight the good fight. In Pennsylvania, in the SHIO agency, we lost more fights than we won. But we knew it was important that we were in the fight, win or lose. And then it's similar with being a faculty member. You need to have enough passion that when you're facing writer's block or you have imposter syndrome or whatever, you have enough passion to push through and to see the bigger picture and to continue to put in the good hard work, because it's worth it. It can be incredibly rewarding. It's important work. And we all have a role to play. So I'm super excited to see the students at DU and where they end up. I know they'll all do great work. We've certainly benefited from it with our partnership with DU and hope that continues. So yeah, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tandberg. We really appreciate you joining us today. And thank you for the incredible work that you're doing with SHIO.
Yeah.
A huge impact on higher education on a national level. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you all.